Hi everybody, this is the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, and I am bringing to you a new series of videos on cleaning. I get lots of ideas for videos for these old machines that we all love, and sometimes I base those on some of the questions I get most frequently. And this is definitely one of them. People often get sewing machines and they come in a whole variety of conditions. Sometimes they have a little bit of oil, old dried oil on them, and sometimes they can come as a real mess. And it doesn't mean that they don't run or can't run. And you never want to get rid of a machine, if it has the potential to be saved. And almost every machine I've ever gotten a hold of can be. A few exceptions, but for the most part, I'd say they all can be rescued. And the question is, what are they being rescued for? Now, when I do sewing machine restorations, I do them because I believe that they are so well made that they make great sewing machines for people who want to actively use them. I have restored machines for collectors before, for people who collect very valuable and rare sewing machines, but that's not the majority of what I do. And I consider any machine that I find generally worthy of rescuing. So I'm going to do this series in a couple of different episodes. The first one I want to talk about with you folks has to do with the exterior. And then a later episode, I'll talk more about the nickel-plated or the metallic parts of a machine and how you would go about cleaning those. That's a different, it's a whole different topic, because the methods you're going to use to clean the non-painted parts of a sewing machine are different than the methods for the painted finishes. So I wanted to start by showing you guys a machine. This is not the one I'm going to demonstrate cleaning, but I want to show you an example of a pretty rough example on the outside in terms of what you might find with a vintage sewing machine. Now, they come in different levels of condition. This machine had what is called the Sphinx design. Of course, over the years, Singer had many wonderful decal patterns. This one was called the Sphinx, and if you look closely, you might be able to make out the faint remnants of that. So before kind of going over what not to do, and that's why you're looking at this machine, I'm gonna put another machine in front of you, and I'll actually show you some of my methods for cleaning machines. The main thing to mention here is that these machines were made of cast iron and steel. Some of the Singers were made out of cast aluminum, but the machines were essentially they were machined as metal. They were cleaned. They would have been primed or double painted with basically black lacquer. Of course, black was the classic color for most of sewing machine history until you get into the 1950s and 60s, when they started introducing colors and lighter tones like beige. So the painting process was essentially as it would have been for many products of the time. This was not true of house paint, but the paints that were used to paint everything from industrial equipment to consumer items like this would have been painted in a lacquer paint. And lacquer is a type of coating that has a very high solvent content. And today we might think of them as oil-based paints, but they had a resin, a lac resin, but they had a lot of lacquer thinner solvent. And what that solvent allowed these paints to do was to dry fairly quickly. When they're on a manufacturing line, so they wanted paints that would dry fast. And so they would put, a decent thickness. How many coats, I can't tell you. I'd have to research that more. But they would basically go in and coat them in black lacquer. Then, unless you have one of the very first, earliest sewing machines ever produced, in which case they would do hand decoration, most of the machines, by the time we get to the early 1900s, they had given up paying someone to do hand-painted designs. I've seen one on a very old machine before. And they went to the decals. And the decals are quite lovely. They're beautiful. And what would happen is they would paint the machine in black, and then they would apply the decals, and then they would cover it again with a coating of clear lacquer. Today we call it clear coating with all those acrylic paints that are used on things like cars. But in these days it was lacquer, and they would put that clear coat, and the clear coat would protect the decals from abrasion, at least initially. Now, any of you who if you're familiar with lacquer in any of its forms, you will know that lacquer is truly one of the most beautiful finishes ever used in producing anything. It has a depth and a gloss that is really hard to recreate in any other paint. And that's one of its great strong suits. One of the downsides, of course, is that lacquer, like a lot of paints, but lacquer in particular, can be delicate when it comes to being scratched or abraded. Now, this is a Class 15 Singer, and I haven't looked up the serial number, but I'm going to take a broad guess. We're looking around 1903, 1906, or thereabouts. So it's been around a long time, but some of you will have machines this old or older that look better. So this machine has had not necessarily a rough life in terms of functioning, but it's had a rough life in terms of its finish. Now, part of that, and I'm going to zoom in here. I want to show you first, we're going to zoom in on the edge of the bed. That's where you typically will see some of the rough spots here. Now, take a look. A lot of times, over the years, we're looking at more than a century, this machine was used. And of course, over time, just the friction and abrasion of sewing would cause wearing away of that lacquer clear coat, and subsequently the wearing away of the decals, because these decals were most often put in borders, beautiful borders. And you can see where a lot of the decals have simply worn away, okay? I mean, this was used as a machine. It wasn't thought of as an antique when it was bought. And the great thing about these old machines is this one is going to be a great candidate to sew once again. So its finish and its aesthetics do not determine its potential for sewing again. So it's kind of a diamond in the rough, if you will. If you look here, right now we're covered in dust here. So if I move some of the dust away, I'll explain in a minute why I'm using this brush. There's very little of the original decal left. A lot of it's worn. There's a lot of yellowing here. And the yellowing could come from the age. It could come from the decal itself. It could come from residues or the remaining lacquer, clear lacquer that was on there, because lacquer will yellow in 100 years. And it could also come from damage from cleaning solvents. And that's the main thing I wanted to show you guys about this machine, is that, and you can really see it up here. Let me come back up. I want you to see the front where it says Singer. You see it right there. Now, a number of things could have happened to sewing machines. Some people would wrap, I don't have anything to really show this, but they would wrap fabric, a band of fabric around the top of the machine, and they would use it as a makeshift pin cushion. I don't see a lot of that type of damage to the finish, but if you notice here where it goes from this sort of gold tone and then it almost turns white or very silvery, that's an example of where someone went to clean the machine. Because remember, whether it had its clear lacquer or not, harsh cleaners are very damaging to vintage sewing machines. So the most important thing I can communicate to you here is that you never want to use a harsh cleaner of any kind on your vintage sewing machine. Do not use household cleaners. Don't use spray cleaners. Don't use bleach. Don't use cleansers. Do not use anything that is abrasive. And basically I'm saying don't use much of anything. And you say, well, gosh, what am I supposed to do now? There are ways to clean a machine, and we're going to talk about that when I pull the other machine over here in front. It's in a little bit better shape, and I want you to see the decals and what we can do with it. But I wanted you to see an example of a machine that has pretty rough finish. Now, when I restore this machine, the one you're looking at now, I'm going to clean it. I'm going to take soft brushes, and there's a reason for that. If you ever listen to people who do car detailing, they will tell you this. Anything that gets on a paint finish of any sort can be an abrasive. Dust may not look scratchy when you touch it, but remember, you're talking about a very delicate lacquer finish here that's, it's been through a lot in its life. So if I start taking a rag and just wiping it down, you can end up putting more scratches in. So I'm going to take a soft brush, and I'm just going to kind of, brush away the heavy dust. You're not really cleaning it so much as just get the heavy stuff off. And when you do that, now you've gotten yourself ready to do more cleaning. And again, if you look here on the front, you can see this bobbin winder, and you'll even see on the hand wheel, sometimes you see sort of a layer of old oil and maybe a little bit of rust, but there's not very much here. It's mostly, it's formed a bit of a patina, if you will. And sometimes the old oil, see what we can find out underneath here. Oh, you can see the old girl, look at it. If you look at it underneath, and I'll zoom in for you, take a look here. Because a lot of times what you're going to see, sometimes people think this is rust, and although it certainly can be, what it is often is not rust, but old sewing oil that got on here, or maybe it was applied here, and it has actually turned yellow and turned into a bit of a varnish as it has aged. That is an issue when you're dealing with contact points where you have moving parts of the machine, and that's an area that you have to unstick. The good news is, she doesn't want to sit still for me. The good news is, folks, that varnish and that old oil it may have actually protected the metal because it acted as a bit of a sealer against rust. You don't want to rely on that, but that's something that may have happened. I've discovered that before when I thought I was dealing with rust and it turned out to be old oil. Or maybe it's a combination. But don't let the old oil bother you. It may have saved the machine for many years, particularly if it was stored in a place it should not have been, such as a basement or a garage. And so, again, when I go into some of the other techniques for restoring, we'll talk about how to treat this and the best way to go about cleaning it. But right now, the underside here is not all that dirty. Very often, if a machine has been sitting in a table or case, it may have gotten lucky and not had too much dust on it. I bought this machine, as you see it, it had no case or table, so I really don't know how it was stored. But again, a lot of these pieces, let's see, I'll show you the side plate here. This side plate has some oxidation on it and some old oil. And like I said, there's a technique for removing this type of thing, and you can bring these pieces back. So don't think if you have a machine like this that it's not salvageable, because it is. Even this is kind of a little stiff right now, but even the tension discs and the assembly there can be taken apart and cleaned. But I just wanted to show you what happens when either decals are worn, or more specifically, they have been chemically damaged by things that people use to clean them with. So let's take a look at this model. Now this is a machine from about the same time period, and it's also a Singer, but its decals are in much better shape. There's some damage, and that's to be expected for many machines. And I got this machine literally as you see it. It's still covered in dust. I was planning on doing a video on this topic. In fact, I believe this machine has sat so long since it was used. And like many Singers, its hand wheel still moves. And it even has a wooden thread spool. And it says, Maldings, Belding, Corticelli. It looks, I don't know if it's an Italian thread. It's old, folks. This machine has not been used in a very long time. But this came out of a treadle, and I thought this would be a good sort of example to show you all. So again, I'm going to suggest to you, when you get a machine, if it is covered in dust like this, and you'll notice down here, I've even got some cobwebs. This machine really is, I've seen a lot worse than this, believe it or not. And again, as I mentioned to you folks in my, my Sewing Machine Restorer's Toolbox, you can use canned air. And so I've checked underneath, there's not a lot of dust there. If you have large amounts of dust, you can use canned air, and it's going to get some of the major dust bunnies out. It's also useful when you can't reach a spot down in the machine and you need to get stuff out of it. But canned air is expensive. You know, it's not cheap. Air is not cheap. And so I find that I don't really need it for this machine. But again, that's a tool, but I would use that sparingly. So for this machine, let me give you an example. Let's take, the top doesn't really have a lot of dust on it. There's a few areas of paint loss up top, and I suspect that this machine was, someone stuck pins in the top of it, and that's what broke the coating, because I rarely see Singer machines flake. Their paint finishes were pretty well done. Other brands have had issues at times, but I don't find that common with Singers. And let's see, so I'm gonna take my brush here, get those cobwebs away. And again, you know, this is not really cleaning. I just want to get some of the dust off, the heavy stuff that's been sitting on it. And by using the brush, the theory here is that I'm being a little less aggressive, because remember, it's lacquer. Now, let's see if this will show in the light. I'm going to zoom in. I want you to take a look at something. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's kind of like this cloudiness. It's hard to describe. It almost looks splotchy, right? It doesn't look really deep. That can be old oil. It can be changes in the paint color that have happened over time. This machine, unfortunately, was stored in someone's garage, and so these plates to the bobbin area, I'm going to have to soak them because they're stuck right now. They can be unstuck, but that's not the point of this video. Notice that these decals have some yellowing. Now, some of these would have been originally gold. You can see some of the green, or maybe it would be helpful if I brought this back up for you all. There we go. So let's look at sort of a close-up, if we can, of these decals. You'll see these beautiful little bird patterns here. I don't know if these were originally blue or green. They look sort of like a combination, but I don't see much silver, and that tells me that whoever owned this machine did not hammer it too heavily with cleaners. On the bed, it's a little different. Most of what I think we are seeing on the bed of the machine is not so much cleaners as simply wearing. So over the years, as someone sewed, the top lacquer coat would have eventually sort of been thinned out, and either just, you know, touching it with human hands or wiping it, over time the decals had started to come off, but this one's not bad. Remember how old this machine is, and again, it was a tool. It was used on a regular basis. So let's say you've got your machine dusted off, you know, the heavy stuff. There are different things you can do. Now, what I have in my hand here is a Kleenex. It's very soft, not toilet paper, not a paper towel. It's a soft Kleenex. And I have put, you know, you spray it with a little water. Never apply liquids directly to the machine. You never want to do that because you're going to get liquid in a place you don't want. And I'm going to come here. I'm going to come across. When you have machines, you never know. You know, you've got old oxidized oil, which turns yellow. You have the old lacquer clear coat, which has yellowed. And then you also, you know, you could have nicotine. I don't smell anything on this machine. I never really do. Metal does not absorb odors, even though wood can. Look at that, just coming off there, I pulled up probably, like I say, I think this is just a film of dirt. Now, again, you want to go very sparingly with that. I know it sounds kind of odd. Well, it's just water. It's not really cleaner. But remember, water, or moisture, I should say, this is not a very wet Kleenex. You can see what it brought off. You know, water is a universal solvent, as they call it. Now I'm going to take a dry one. I'm going to come over here. In fact, one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to try to kind of do my demonstration here on half of the bed. Okay, we'll come right down the middle there, because I want you to see the difference of what a machine can look like when you clean it without stripping it. I know that some of you have seen where people will strip machines and they'll repaint them. Some of these people are very talented and they do an amazing job. I am much more of a believer in conserving what is left, in restoring things and keeping them in mint condition. A lot of people who have featherweights have had them painted and they're beautiful, but to do a good custom paint job on any sewing machine is extremely time consuming to do right, and it's very expensive. And if you ever look into having one done, you may discover that. So I have taken dry Kleenex and I've gone back over where I did before. And now look at that, guys, just with the use of just with a damp Kleenex. You know, here's where I cleaned and here's where I haven't. Now, when you look at the layout of the decals up here, keep in mind that the idea is not necessarily to bring back every single color. These decals would have changed chemically over time. Remember, it's over 100 years old. And then all of the other items that I just described to you that can cause yellowing. Now, some of you may have seen, I've seen people on videos before where they have taken hand cleaner and used it as a cleaning agent for a sewing machine. Gojo is a famous brand, but there are other brands. And they are always careful, I believe, to mention you absolutely only want to use non-pumice, because those hand cleaners come in a regular and they come in a pumice variety. Pumice is like a ground lava stone. That would be the worst thing you could do. You would be grinding the beautiful remains of your paint into oblivion. So you never want to do that. My opinion on the hand cleaner is that I tried it once and it worked okay, but I found that it didn't really work for me any better than my favorite go-to solution for this. The thing about anything used to clean a surface is that paint and lacquer in this case and the decals all involve chemistry. They did when they were new, and they are a form of chemistry on top of the metal. Any kind of cleaning solvent is also a chemical, and you never know what the reaction is going to be. So if you decided to use hand cleaner, you really want to try it in an inconspicuous spot, because I never am totally sure about what's going to happen if I do that. And so my preference is to use this. It is the same thing you use to lubricate your machine, sewing machine oil. And the reason for that is sewing machine oil was the one thing that the manufacturer knew that was likely to get on the machine, because people were putting oil in it and was going to get on there. And so, as far as I can tell, I have never had any issues with sewing machine oil causing damage to the finish of an old sewing machine. Now, obviously, you have to be careful how aggressive you are with it. And so here, I'm just going to take the sewing machine bottle and I'm just going to put drops onto the bed of the machine. In this case, you can do this in different areas of the machine. And you can use it liberally. I mean, it's not like you have to be ultra careful with it. Now, I've got a couple of different things here. This is cotton. These are just, you can buy this in a drugstore. Actually, I just save cotton when it comes out of like a vitamin bottle or something. And then, of course, cotton swabs. You guys have heard me say cotton swabs are one of the most useful tools when you're dealing with old machines. So if I'll take the cotton swab, for example, and I'm just going to gently, remember, we don't know how much of the original lacquer clear coat is there, right? And so you want to be extra careful. And the oil does fill in some of these, some of the old scratches, which is part of what gives you that kind of that wet look, just like when you're waxing a car. Now, Here's one of the reasons that sewing machine oil does not generally harm any old sewing machine finish. The oil acts as a solvent, and if you look, you'll see I'm already pulling up old dirt. But here's the trade-off. In order to preserve your paint finish, the oil is slower. It works really well, but it takes longer. It's not one of these things where you take cleaner, you spray it down, and you strip all the dirt off, because if you do that, you're going to really damage the finish of your machine. So it's a very bad idea to try to go fast. Guess what I'm saying here, folks, is patience is your friend, and you will be rewarded with a machine that is not damaged and can come out so much more beautiful than it did before. Now, other people have asked me, well, hey, should I wax it? You know, because they're thinking about, you know, just like they've worked on the finish of their car. You know, there are different ideas on this. Some people are real big believers in waxing. I personally am not. I believe that just like you take butcher block oil to a butcher block and you just kind of buff it. That's my approach to this with sewing machine oil on my sewing machines. I just want to buff it, and you can see, look at all the dirt that's coming off, right? Now, I'm going to take another piece of cotton, and the area that I just did, I'm going to do again. Now, unlike with the water, it's okay if you want to put the oil directly on your sewing machine. Because again, you can imagine how many times over the life of this machine oil got dripped on it and it didn't hurt it. And notice I'm being very gentle. You don't want to lose any of your decals, so just go easy. This is a very soft, ball of cotton. And it's going to shed a little bit. I've got a few cotton hairs here, but again, I'm not on any of these sharp metal parts, so I'm not worried. You don't want to get cotton fibers in the smaller working pieces and moving pieces of the machine, but that's not really going to be an issue because we're not going to, in another episode, I am not going to clean any of my nickel-plated parts or my moving parts with cotton and oil. That's not what we're going to have a different method for those parts, but this is just for your painted finish. And I should mention, by the way, I don't do this when I first start on a machine. I get all of the major dust and dirt off of it so I can see what I'm doing, and then I do the full restoration, and then when I'm done, I save the best for last. This is like the dessert. So that's what I do. You can do it in the order that you want to, obviously. Now, how do you know when it's clean? Well, you continue rubbing, putting oil on. I'm still getting a little bit of dirt there. And how do you know when enough is enough? You can do this, you can make that judgment yourself, but generally, sometimes you'll do this and it will just keep pulling up old dirt, old, smoke stains, who knows what it is. But eventually, it'll stop, and you can stop at any point you want to. And of course, I'm still getting some coming up because, again, the oil is gentle, and it is a solvent in a way, but it's a very gentle one. It takes longer, but it doesn't hurt your paint finish. Now, let's see if I can give you guys a nice picture of what I'm seeing here. Oh, by the way, I might as well show you this. I can put oil on the tip of a cotton swab, and so you may have areas, down here where the two pieces join, and you can also go around the serial number plate, and you can see I've pulled up, grit and grime. Again, this here, you could do that on the metal parts, but there are there are better ways to work on metal, and I'm going to do a different video on that because there are different rules for that. Now let's see how that shows up, guys. I'll try to zoom in here for you. And you can see there's a huge difference here, right? Now, over time, as you start to use the machine and you buff it, it'll be slightly less glossy than this, but it's still going to be far better than it was. And now all that cloudiness is gone compared to over here. That's a pretty dramatic difference. Again, we are not stripping and redoing decals. There are people who do that, and I admire that. It's a heck of a job. But I am much more of a preserver than I am a customizer. So that's just a good example there for you to see what you can do with a machine. Now, for the upper parts of the machine, you may want to put some oil on the cotton for the vertical areas, right? I didn't even take my Kleenex to this. I went straight to the oil. And again, you can see, if I move the camera, there we go. You really, it's so wonderful to kind of watch what the oil does. It not only does it remove the soiling, but it brings this back to life, and you start to get a picture of what this machine may have looked like when it was brand new. Imagine well over 100 years ago, someone getting this machine, paying a lot of money for it and protecting it. And those of you who are wanting to take care of your machine, or maybe you're into restoring, you're basically taking over. You're taking the baton for a new generation, and you're preserving, these amazing machines that are built to a standard that nothing is built to today. So I hope this was helpful in trying to understand how to go about restoring a machine like this. Now, for those of you who have machines from the 50s that have those beige colors and other colors, those paint finishes are slightly different. They may or may not have lacquer clear coats on them, but you want to treat them the same way, because even if they don't have decals, if you apply a harsh cleaner, because I've tried foam cleaners before on those later machines in the 50s and 60s, and what will happen is they will cause the shine on those beige colored machines, and it will dull them just a bit, and you can buff them back up with oil. But honestly, given how much cleaning I'm able to accomplish here with sewing machine oil, that's your cleaner. You have it. You should have sewing machine oil on hand already. And if you don't have soft cotton, you can get some easily. Or if you don't have cotton, you can use something even like a Kleenex, but be sure it's soft. Don't use anything harsh. Don't use paper towels. They're not soft enough, and they're going to cause scuffing. But anyway, that is episode 1 of how to clean a vintage sewing machine, and saving the best for last here. But anyway, in the future, I'm going to talk to you folks more about cleaning metal parts and how to get those looking shiny, not just how to restore them, but how do you get them looking nice again in a way that doesn't hurt them. Thanks for watching, folks, and if you have any other ideas, feel free to share those in the comments. Thank you.